Basically, your argument saying it just looks good on paper means nothing. And this is because science always has to be done on paper. And even science students are not told what to believe. They are shown how to perform various experiments. Even in high school, physics students use blocks and ramps and balls and pendulums and carts and rulers and timers to derive Newton's laws and many other such pillars of science for themselves. They're not told what to believe. They know. They personally do the science which has already been done by others to derive the knowledge that we already know and prove its validity to themselves. Much like you all could do if you weren't so lazy, biased, dogmatic NPCs. In a nutshell, saying it only looks good on paper and is not the same in reality, really, it just goes to discredit you from having any form of adult conversation, and anyone at this point listening to you can stop listening to you. I, of course, understand why you people adopt this viewpoint, as it prevents you from needing to use your brains and actually think. It's much easier to simply swallow an ideology and accept whatever you hear if it's what you want to believe. But again, believe what you want to believe. Your beliefs are baseless. They have no factual data to them, and you are unable to defend them in any rational way. This is because you're incapable of doing anything other than repeating what you've already been told. You no longer have the ability to think critically, and you are merely assuming others are doing the same thing, regurgitating others' ideas. But they're not. There are those of us who are educated in science and actually understand physics and how things work, and we use this information to our advantage, not just our bodies, but also to help our clients and make our lives better. This is also how we build technology, such as computers and the internet, both of which you are using to claim that such science which produced them only looks good on paper and doesn't function in the real world. Hello and welcome to Castle's Corner. I am Coach Castle, and today I will be bringing you the intelligent argument for exercise and health. The argument for only exercising 20 minutes a day, for only using one perfect movement for every muscle on your body, an argument for correct intensity and frequency and consistency, an argument for science. Now, this is Coach Castle against 99% of the fitness industry. Now, as many of you are aware, since my introduction to Doug Brignoli, more than 8 years ago now, I have continuously strived to advance and improve upon my knowledge of human physiology, biomechanics, and overall human health and movement. Since the beginning of my time working with Doug, we greatly differed on our approach and style of education, as well as the presentation of our material. As many of you are aware, Doug was very political, non-confrontational, very much laying out the objective facts in a very calm, straightforward, and pleasant way, never giving in to the anger or the considerable amounts of hate that he more than likely constantly experienced from just about everyone in the industry. Now, we had many different discussions about this where I inquired repeatedly as to why this was the way that he handled things. Why did he do it this way? And he always maintained that it was the best way to educate, as well as to spread the message of intelligent training to the most people. Unfortunately, my great teacher and friend to many, Doug Brignoli, has been taken before he was able to complete his work. And as many of you know, during his time, Doug was shunned and ridiculed by most of the fitness industry for no reason other than he wanted to train intelligently and help others. In spite of all that he did to advance the correct knowledge with his enormous brain and heart, still, they would refuse to listen to him and go back to their ego-driven ways. So, with Doug gone, I have decided to take up the torch, as I think it is critical that the voice of reason be heard, and if you want something done right, well, you had better do it yourself after all. So, my style is very different. It is very confrontational, aggressive, and argumentative. I could really care less about anyone's opinions. Now, this is because facts don't care about your feelings or beliefs or your opinions. They are objective and repeatable, unlike your freaking gym bro logic. Now, the reason I choose to take this approach is because I have no patience or tolerance for laziness or the uneducated babblings of others who are simply wrapped in an ideology and unaware that they are basically subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Basically, they're stupid and don't know that they're stupid because they're closed-minded. Now, I cannot abide by these many foolish gym bros, trainers, and coaches who seem to think that simply by regurgitating something that they read in a magazine, or perhaps citing that they have a certification of some form, or maybe two, and have been training clients for years, or that they're trained with one of the best. I don't care. They're ridiculously uneducated opinions, and they don't hold any weight whatsoever. They're just assumptions. So what I've done for this video is to draw on my 8 years of experience I have in educating, lecturing, coaching, and writing about biomechanics, and put together the top 5 things that all uneducated coaches, trainers, and gym bros have to say about biomechanics and why they keep training the way that they do. Now, I was hoping it would be more than 5 things. However, after combing my memory, hundreds of emails and messages, and asking many people, it can all be simplified into 5 very illogical speaking points, which have no relevance to the facts at hand regarding biomechanics. Now, specifically, there has never, ever been any refuting of the very basic principles of physics and anatomy, which are all very well known and well documented. Instead, these idiots simply rely on ad hominem, straw man, bandwagon, and appeal to authority arguments to draw various illogical conclusions. Now, these are all logical fallacies, which I'll be getting into and taking apart later. Now, whether you're an amateur or a professional athlete, a gym rat or a competitive bodybuilder, a senior citizen or a youth, using and understanding the most efficient exercises will allow you to optimally work each muscle of your body without compromise, so you can maximally muscle build efficiently while minimizing the risk of injury and waste of effort. So basically, you build big muscles as fast as possible without damaging yourself. Now, most people want to achieve their goals as quickly as possible, obviously. And the best way to do this, of course, is learning and applying these most efficient exercises with the correct frequency, intensity, and consistency over time. Now, of course, people have genetic limitations and limitations caused by previous injuries and such. And in these cases, the proper form may be slightly compromised, as is the potential benefit. But it's still valuable to identify what constitutes ideal joint motion so that one can avoid exercises that are less joint friendly. Now, however, as I say frequently, knowledge is power, and invest in learning how to be smart about your exercise selections and principles of intensity. Now, of course, achieving that in the realm of fitness requires selecting, again, only the most productive exercises and skipping exercises that require more effort but produce less benefit and have a higher risk of injury. Now, understand though, if your goal is optimal muscle development, replacing an efficient exercise with a less efficient one for the sake of variety or simply because you're bored, it just leads to wasted time and effort. It is really foolish to believe that all exercises have the same degree of value or benefit. They do not. Therefore, exercises are not interchangeable like many people think that they are. And it's also misguided to believe that a variety of exercises is essential, or that different exercises allow you to alter the shape of a muscle. This is extremely stupid, and we're going to get into this as well. The good news is that you don't need to know about all these elaborate scientific things and fallacies I'm about to get into to know that you're training correctly. You can just look at an anatomy chart. So, for example, looking at an anatomy chart, it's very easy to see that the abs, the ab muscle, does not connect to the femurs or the upper legs. Therefore, your abs cannot raise your legs. It's easy to see that the dividers in the abdominal wall are nothing more than tendons and cannot be added nor subtracted from. It's easy to see that the psoas originates on the lumbar spine, where you flex your hip. The psoas contracts and pulls the lumbar spine forward. and lifts your leg, which is the opposite of what abs are trying to do during an abs exercise. They're trying to hold your pelvis stable. Therefore, the logical conclusions that can be gleaned just from looking at an anatomy chart, and apparently no one has ever stated, are the following. The leg raise is not a good exercise for the abs, not even a little bit. You cannot add notches or ridges to your abs if you don't already have them. There is no such thing as a separate lower or middle or upper abs. Raising the legs during an ab exercise interferes with spinal flexion, which is what the abs are trying to do during an ab exercise. They are trying to curl your spine. Now, does anyone need any scientific reference to arrive at these conclusions, or for somebody to believe these conclusions? Or can they just look at an anatomy chart and see that the muscle doesn't connect to the bone? The evidence is very plain for everyone to see. Of course, these uneducated masses who are simply ignorant of the study and application of biomechanics will simply state in their comments and emails that those of us who are attempting to explain why biomechanics are so effective are simply indoctrinated and are regurgitating what we've been told. Now, this is because most of you don't know how to formulate your arguments properly, so this is what I'm going to be helping you do today. Now, so you all know, the irony of these gym bros saying this, of course, is that these foolish gym bros are the ones, in fact, who are regurgitating their ideology. The reason I say ideology is because there are not a multitude of different arguments as far as I can tell. There are only 5. And again, it's 5 arguments, not 5 opposing facts. Now, on top of that, you morons honestly just repeat the same thing word for word and even cite the same so-called authorities over and over and over repeatedly. Now, this is, of course, because you all watch the same ridiculous YouTube videos made by the same bunch of freaking idiotic YouTube personalities. Dave Palumbo, Jeff Cavaliere, Ronnie Coleman, Charles Glassman, Arnold Schwarzenegger, these guys who don't actually have any idea how they got the bodies that they got. And all of you quote them verbatim without applying a single shred of critical thinking on your own part. So, now that I've had 8 years to become very familiar with your many arguments, which are all the same exact 5, that I've been hearing for all these years, just said in different words sometimes, I've gotten really tired of it, and I figured I would explain in very simple terms, so even a child can understand, why these 5 so-called arguments are nothing more than the uneducated ramblings of those who are unable to comprehend basic high school science. But back to fallacies. Like in politics in the courtroom, fallacies sometimes scorch entire populations and professions, often with the most devastating results, making what seemed like a good idea turn into a tragedy very frequently. Now, of course, this also happens in the realm of fitness. Now, fallacies are not always deliberate, but a prudent athlete or coach should always be able to identify and unmask fallacies in arguments. In today's technological age, we are bombarded with information from many different sources, many different social medias, many different people whispering in our ears, on top of the ridiculous documentaries which are being made. And, of course, navigating these treacherous waters, especially when it comes to information found on social media, can be very difficult, kind of to dig through the bullshit, if you will. So, when you come across a post presenting an argument or claim, you should be able to decide what is being presented is legitimate or not. You'll be able to analyze the quality of information and arguments being given by these so-called experts through a critical, skeptical, and rational lens, paying close attention to credibility, relevance, the logical strength of the arguments, the balance of the evidence, and the author's level of bias. Now, just to be clear, it's not a crime to try to persuade someone towards an opinion. It's what I'm doing literally right now. I'm on a mission to persuade you to battle the bullshit and guide yourself and your friends and family towards true principles and strength and conditioning, and to save you time. There's a lot of content out there, but most of it is just bullshit that needs battling. Now, often these idiots may not have any credible evidence, or may only be relying on partial evidence, or will use other devices of argumentation to sway your thinking, to promote, to sell a product, to market some new ridiculous gym gadget that you have no use for. Now, you need to be aware of these. These are known as logical fallacies. And as the name implies, logical fallacies come down to one thing: bad logic. And by learning about these fallacies, which I'm digging into in just 2 seconds, you will be more likely to recognize them in their use, avoid using them yourself, and be better prepared to battle the bullshit arguments presented against you on social media and in your life. So, what is this logical fallacy? Well, fallacies were explained thousands of years ago by a guy named Aristotle. You guys know him. He described these fallacies as tricks of the mind. They are deceptive arguments that make you believe one thing is true or happening when it actually isn't. Now, as coaches, rehab professionals, or athletes, we are particularly vulnerable to fallacies as we look for any evidence that supports our own beliefs. So this is myself included, of course. Therefore, it's very important that we, myself included, have a firm grasp and understanding of logical fallacies as well as our own cognitive biases so that we can educate ourselves and our clients to the best of our abilities. Now, here is a list of the most common logical fallacies which are found in the arguments against biomechanics and basically pro-tradition and ego lifting, as some of the names imply. They're basically appeal to tradition, ad hominem, straw man, bandwagon, and appeal to authority. Now, I'm sure you will certainly recognize many of them, as I'm sure many of you have heard them at least once before and not been able to accurately refute it, even though you recognized what was going on. But in case you didn't know, mainstream was not always mainstream, and nothing would ever advance without change. Now, unfortunately, people have always ridiculed individuals who were able to see the truth of the matter and not simply follow the crowd. These individuals who go against the crowd are the movers and the shakers of the world. They are the creators. And although, unfortunately, almost unanimously throughout history, great minds have been persecuted or shunned and almost never vindicated during their actual lifetime. Some of these simple examples would be those that we all know and respect in the scientific community, such as Eratosthenes. Over 2,000 years ago, he was the first person known to calculate the circumference of the Earth, which he did by using the extensive survey results he could access in his role at the Library of Alexandria, as well as basic math and a stick in a hole in the ground. Now, even with these tools, his calculation was remarkably accurate. He was also the first to calculate Earth axial tilt, which proved to be remarkably accurate. He created the first global projection of the world, incorporating parallels and meridians based on the available geographic knowledge of his era. And yet still, 2,000 years later, there are many flat earthers who simply disbelieve the evidence of their own eyes, basic observational skills, basic math, and even basic logic. How about Galileo? Now, back in Galileo's day, the predominant view in astronomy was a model first espoused by Aristotle, in which the sun and planets revolved around the Earth. Now, this is a system that had been reigning in science for over 1,400 years at this point. Then came Galileo. In 1610, Galileo used his telescope to make some surprising discoveries that disputed this long-held view, coming up with the theory that we all know and understand to be true. This is the fact that Earth and other planets revolve around the sun due to gravity. However, he was ridiculed his entire life for this belief, including being put on trial, and it took over 300 years for his theory to become mainstream. How about Charles Darwin? You've heard of him. Now, when his work was first made public in 1859, it shocked Britain's religious establishment and the world. He was ridiculed and persecuted for his entire life, and while today it is accepted by virtually all scientists, evolutionary theory still is rejected by many Americans, often because it conflicts with their religious beliefs about divine creation. But now, thankfully, in a recent polling, it is estimated that 82% of Americans believe that humans have evolved through evolution with no aid whatsoever from God. However, that still says that a large portion of the world, including, unfortunately, 18% of Americans, believe that the theory of evolution is not true, despite the ungodly, pun intended, amounts of evidence. How about Ludwig Boltzmann? He developed equations and formulas which explain the properties of atoms and how they determine physical nature of matter. Now it transpires that proposing a theory that disproves other laws of physics and scientists thought to be correct at the time does not make you particularly popular or appreciated. After years and years of fighting for atom theory to be accepted, Boltzmann unfortunately committed suicide. Now this was only 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory to be true. Now these logical fallacies are the fallacy of appeal to tradition. Essentially, in this case, what the men had to work against was the argument that something is true or valuable simply on the grounds that it has always been believed to be so. A simple real-life example in fitness would be the dogmatic insistence that you must do heavy squats to build big legs, because everyone has done them who has ever had big legs. However, this is of course a ridiculous statement, and of course in no way, shape, or form constitutes an argument against the very basic laws of physics, such as lever magnification, mechanical advantage and disadvantage, neurological implications such as reciprocal inhibition, many other things, or the fact that there is a large variety of exercises which will all produce similar or even better outcomes in leg development. Appealing to tradition in respect to exercise is a particularly silly argument, especially considering that we have only actually been studying exercise science for roughly 70 years. As previously mentioned, we have known the Earth was round for well over 2,000 years, and yet there are still these freaking moronic flat earthers. Science takes time to advance, as well as to distribute the information to the masses of people. In this case, your ignorance does not make you correct, just dogmatic and closed-minded. Of course, the easiest way to point out the flaw in this thinking is to explain that tradition does not necessarily make something good, considering how much progress we have made the past 200 years, shattering traditions left and right. Just a few examples: it was traditionally believed that the woman's place was in the home and the kitchen. It was traditionally believed homosexuality was sinful and against nature. People have traditionally smoked in bars, on airplanes, and also while pregnant. People have traditionally believed the Earth was the center of the universe. Most people still hold the belief that they are the center of the universe. People traditionally believe in witchcraft, not the science of germs. I think I have made my point, and I'm beating a horse dead that is dead at this point. So, in the realm of fitness, appealing to tradition is very similar to the next fallacy, so I'm going to be grouping them together just to keep it short. This is the bandwagon fallacy. The bandwagon fallacy is very similar to this case because when the illogical masses use the bandwagon fallacy in their pitiful arguments, not only is it very easy to spot, it's very easy to also point out. In this case, they are assuming something is true or right or good because other people agree with it and endorse it. You want to be like Arnold? You better eat your Wheaties because Arnold ate them. You want to get jacked and tan? Well, you need to get yourself the latest version of Jacked 3D because Flex Wheeler takes it and promotes it. When something is accepted because it's popular and has the reputation of lending status, it has a huge appeal. And basically, it makes you not look like an outsider if you're doing the same thing as everybody else, so you blend in with the herd. Now, basically, it is putting the preconceived notion in your mind that it is good or valuable or important, and if you're not doing it, you won't be. There is no supporting evidence available in these cases. Now, the next extremely common fallacy is one which you guys know very well. You see it in YouTube comments the world over. It is the ad hominem fallacy. Now, many times you might think you are having a constructive conversational debate with another coach or a fellow gym goer or a friend about the importance of squatting knees forward, or the importance of full range of motion, or not using momentum, when they resort to a verbal attack, calling you a dumb fat idiot, a fool with no muscle, a little skeleton, a skinny bitch, these things. These ad hominem attacks are very common, and they're found in shouting matches all over social media. Most people resort to these when they have run out of any form of an actual argument, and due to not having any actual data or facts or a brain, they simply insult the person as if it was evidence in support of their stance. The ad hominem argument is simply irrelevant to the facts at hand. It doesn't contribute anything to the original argument, although it does say a lot about the simpleton who is employing this ad hominem strategy. Abusing and insulting a person's appearance or background is simply irrelevant and a distraction technique, simply showcasing you have no ability to logically understand the argument in front of you or to refute it with your own evidence. So anytime somebody resorts to name-calling, you know you have already won the argument and simply need to remain calm and continue basically pressing your case of actual, factual data. Now, these kinds of arguments, the ad hominem, will also typically go hand in hand with the next. This fallacy is the straw man fallacy. This argument is simply misrepresenting an opponent's argument, then directing your attack at the misrepresentation, and then using this false attack of misdirecting to refuse your opponent's real factual position. So let me just give you a real life example of this. We already brought up evolution. So again, in many religious debates, these so-called religious believers, and I do not use the word nicely, they believe because they don't have evidence, will always ask the question, if evolution is true, then how come there are still monkeys if we evolved from them? Well, for starters, evolution theory neither teaches that humans evolved from monkeys, nor that at the evolution of a new species, the old species goes extinct. Just think about how many different variations of dogs or cats there are, or for example, I could keep going, but I'll stop. Now, this rebuttal is only effective when attacking a grossly simplified and inaccurate version of evolutionary theory, of course. But without enough evidence to support their own position with facts, because they don't have a position, they attempt misdirection to make their opponent's stance look weaker by completely and intentionally misrepresenting their actual claim, saying we evolved from monkeys. We never said that. Basically, so they do that to attack the simplified and incorrect version, although it was the original argument, which of course it's not. So basically, they're just putting words in their opponent's mouth, hoping nobody notices that they've created a scarecrow out of literal nothingness to punch. Of course, once again, you notice that if they have to resort to the straw man fallacy, you have already won. If you can simply stay calm and point out that they are speaking on a completely unrelated subject and are not currently vocalizing your actual argument. Then you will win the argument by forcing them to stay on the actual points of your argument, the ones that you are actually making, and attempting to review those exact points without going off topic. And finally, the last one, when all other arguments and all other small-minded little opinions have run out, they will always resort to the old appeal to authority. Now, unfortunately for these ignorant arguments, when it comes to logic, ignorance is not an acceptable form of proof. This is, of course, where lazy people will steer conveniently away from tested and validated evidence, as if expert opinion is always correct. So suppose somebody says, I squat every day because it worked for Tom Platz. You think you know better than him? Look at his legs. That's nice. Although Tom Platz has large legs, he isn't a relevant authority when it comes to physiology or physics. He simply worked hard and had the very good fortune of having great genetics. This is a fallacy of appeal to authority. So let's look at two different examples in this case just to really understand it. In example one, Richard Dawkins, somebody who frequently speaks about evolution as he is an evolutionary biologist and perhaps the foremost expert in the field. He says evolution is true. Therefore, it's true. The explanation for this, though? Richard Dawkins certainly knows about evolution, and he can confidently tell us it's true. But that's not what makes it true. What makes it true is the irrefutable mountains of evidence for the theory. Now, how about example 2? How do I know that you have to squat heavy weight to get big quads? Because Ronnie Coleman, the 8-time Olympian champion, said so. That's how I know. As for this explanation, well, Ronnie Coleman may be an industry expert as well as a bodybuilding legend. Once again, with amazing genetics, he is not an expert in physics nor anatomy, which is the subject at hand. Any claim such as the one made should require supporting evidence. My evidence is clear, factual, physical, tested, time-tested data of physics and anatomy. His evidence is a completely destroyed body, even with great genetics and massive amounts of drugs. If you want a pro tip from me, always question the authorities. Come to your own conclusions and become the authority. In case you hadn't noticed, the masses are always wrong. Now let's directly address these claims made by these so-called fitness professionals and take them apart with science. The following is a list of criteria that determine the biomechanical value of a given resistance exercise. Now, after this summary, I will then be using these same principles as examples to explain and demonstrate my case against the 5 most common arguments against biomechanical training. Those arguments, just so you guys know what we'll be getting into, are as follows. It only looks good on paper. You need to lift heavy weights. Compound exercises are more time efficient. It doesn't matter, you just need to pick up heavy things and put them down. Muscles won't know how to work together if you train them independently. Now, as for my case, it is summarized in the following 12 points, which I'm going to be expounding upon later. So point number 1, an exercise that allows the operating lever of the target muscle to move directly towards the muscle's origin is more efficient than an exercise that does not allow that. The more directly towards the muscle origin, the more efficient the movement is. The less directly it is, the more inefficient it is, in terms of percentages of participation. Point 2, dynamic muscle contraction is better than isometric muscle contraction in terms of visible muscle development, and as for strength improvement throughout the entire range of motion, instead of just a one place where an isometric contraction is held. More range of motion is always better than less range of motion. Point number 3, unilateral exercise or independent limb resistance is generally better than bilateral exercise or shared instrument resistance. Point 4, exercises that provide alignment between the direction of the resistance, the direction of the motion, the origin and insertion of the target muscle are more efficient than exercises that do not provide this alignment. This automatically implies that the direction of resistance and the direction of your concentric motion be directly opposed to each other. If an exercise lacks alignment, instead of fully loading your intended target muscle, the resistance will be diluted and a percentage of the load will be diverted to other non-target muscles and strained joints. Point number 5, exercises that allow your target muscle to be positioned directly opposite the direction of resistance, or the line of force, are more efficient than exercises where the target muscle is not directly opposite the direction of resistance. Whichever muscle is positioned directly opposite the resistance will be the most loaded, whether you want it to be or not. That's physics. Point 6, exercises that avoid reciprocal inhibition are better than exercises that do not trigger reciprocal inhibition. Likewise, exercises that allow the anatomy to function without other conflicts of interest are better than exercises that do not cause the type of conflict. An example of this was the previously mentioned leg raises, where 2 different muscles, the abs and the psoas, inhibit each other because they are battling for opposite spinal position. Point number 7, exercises that allow the operating lever of a target muscle to cross resistance perpendicularly are more efficient than exercises that cause the operating lever to run mostly parallel with the resistance. Point number 8, exercises that allow the operating lever of a target muscle to work with its full length are more efficient than exercises where the operating lever is effectively shortened by a secondary lever. Point number 7, exercises that avoid combining mechanical disadvantage with an operating lever that is too active are better than exercises where the 2 force magnifiers are combined. Point 10, exercises that are early phase loaded are generally better than exercises that are light phase loaded. Any mechanical disadvantage that may occur during an exercise would be factored into this decision. This is called finding the optimum resistance curve for your target muscle. Point number 11. Exercises that do not strain a joint by unnecessarily twisting or distorting it are generally better than exercises that do strain or twist and distort a joint. This rule does not need to be stated if the above 10 criteria are met. Any exercise that moves the target muscle insertion towards that muscle's origin and has proper alignment will automatically operate the corresponding joint in a way that is natural and consistent with the human musculoskeletal design. Point 12. Exercises that are performed with deliberate muscle contraction are better than exercises that are performed with momentum. Now, efficiency is defined as getting the most benefit with the least cost. Using momentum reduces the resistance to a target muscle, therefore, more weight must be used. But using more weight while using momentum does not load a target muscle more. It's simply paying more for the less benefit. So you understand, these 12 criteria allow us to separate high-value exercises from exercises that have varying degrees of lesser value. It is very misguided to believe that all exercises have the same degree of value or benefit. They do not. Therefore, exercises are not as interchangeable as many people believe. It is also very misguided to believe that a variety of exercises are essential or that somehow different exercises will allow you to alter the shape of a muscle. The shape of our muscles is genetically determined, and exercises, of course, differ primarily in terms of mechanical efficiency and in terms of how closely it mimics the most natural or most ideal anatomical function of your target muscle and its corresponding joint. Understanding these concepts allows you to realize that much of what have been taught about resistance exercise is actually nothing more than bullshit. So let's get into the actual arguments now. The first argument. This way you're actually accomplishing more work with each rep. Now by insertion and origin, I'm once again talking about your body and muscles. Typically, the origin is the less mobile point and it is fixed closest to the body's midline. The insertion typically is on the more mobile bone or lever of the body. For example, the pectorals originate on the sternum, and your pectorals insert and exert their action on the humerus, thus by bringing the arm closer to the midline of the body. And this is because muscles can only pull insertion to origin. So just think for a moment, if I handed you one end of a rope and tied the other to a very heavy box, would you be able to do anything other than pull the box towards yourselves? Could you push the box away with the rope? Could you pull it to the left and the right without changing your body position? No. And that's because in this case, you are the anchor or the origin, and the rope is the muscle fiber, and the box is the insertion point on the opposite bone. Let's consider two different exercises, the barbell bench press and the dumbbell bench press. Now in the bench press, you may be able to fully or nearly fully lengthen the pec by lowering the barbell to the chest. However, pressing back up to lockout only gets 50 to 75% of a full musculature contraction. Now conversely, in the dumbbell bench press, you can lower the weights further and externally rotate while doing so, which stretches and engages the pec more, and also press all the way up while also simultaneously bringing the weights in towards your chest. Now with a little internal rotation of the humerus as you come close to lockout, you have fully contracted your pec in the correct plane of movement, provided you are doing it decline. Now such techniques increase the total lifting volume by increasing the distance through which you actually exert the force, as well as hopefully within the correct resistance curve, thus maximally using the levers or bones in your body to your advantage. So let's just again talk about some basic lever principles here. Let's talk about parallel levers versus perpendicular levers. Now whenever I say parallel lever, I parallel to gravity. So parallel to gravity levers, such as a building or a pole. A perpendicular lever, just think something like a floor or a flag holder or something. But anyways, your bones follow these same principles of physics, of course. And whenever you see someone doing a bench dip or a parallel bar bench dip, you will notice that their forearm is almost vertical or parallel with gravity, just like a building. And it only breaks from the neutral or parallel position by about 10 or 11 degrees at the very most. So let's do some math. Let's just say you're a 180-pound guy, and you want to figure out how much load each of your triceps is going to be getting while performing this action. Well, you take the 180 pounds of your weight, and you're going to divide it by the two arms you have, thus giving you 90. Then the length of your forearm is about a 12-to-1 ratio. So you have a magnification of 12. Then, as you can see, 90 times 12 times 11% active lever gives you about 119 pounds of load per triceps, but it's at the cost of 180 pounds of effort. However, let's look at the same scenario, same person, but I'm going to have that person, 180-pound guy, lie on a decline bench with a pair of 20-pound dumbbells and perform a set of skull crushers where the forearm does not cross gravity with a 100% lever. And then let's look at the load on the triceps. Let's say 20 pounds dumbbell times 12, the forearm is 100% active, is 240 pounds of load per triceps at the cost of only 40 pounds, 20 in each hands. This is actually efficient, and there's also no shoulder impingement. So why would you bother doing an exercise that costs you 180 pounds of effort, but only loads your triceps with 119 pounds, when you can do 40 pounds of cost and 240 pounds of load on your triceps simply doing a skull crusher with dumbbells? Furthermore, more food for thought here, the triceps are not even the most loaded muscle groups. During the dips, that's your front deltoid. And it's not like it's working a different head of the triceps. All three heads are working both ways. It's the all or nothing principle. And finally, there is the fact that when you do these dips, it damages your shoulder cradle over time. And also for most people, their body weight is far too much for these particular muscle groups when performing this exercise, leading to swinging, momentum, bad form, increasing damage, and also, again, restricting muscle growth. Now, in a final example, back to the swinging, one of the most common mistakes made during strength training is, again, the use of momentum or swinging. For everyday movements, anything really, the use of momentum is normal, it's adaptive, it saves you energy. It's the body's way of basically conserving as much energy as possible, particularly during walking, running, throwing, pushing, general day activities. But during strength training, momentum is counterproductive. And this is because it decreases the work a muscle does, thereby decreasing the effectiveness of the exercise. And also, what's worse, it is dangerous to the joints and spinal cord, since it overloads these areas, causing unnecessary wear and tear. Now, to understand what the use of momentum looks like during strength training, you can just imagine any of these many people I'm sure you've seen at the gym doing a basic barbell curl or overloading themselves with a dumbbell which is far too heavy. All they're going to be doing is swinging, wildly bouncing the weight. It looks ridiculous. We all know what momentum is, but muscles in your body in general are very sneaky things, and you can use momentum a lot of different ways without meaning to. So basically, when momentum is used during strength training, the exercise will be characterized by the same swinging motion of any form of lever on the body, though. The exerciser may appear to be bouncing or swaying their arms, the upper arm, their upper leg might be moving when they don't want it to be moving. An exercise which momentum is very easy to see and is basically always employed with is the back extension. Now, when momentum is used, this exercise looks like a drop of the torso due to gravity, followed by a swing up that is stopped only by the mechanical limits of the spine. Now, this technique, of course, fails to work the lower back muscles and places a dangerous load on the spine. Now, of course, again, during strength training, momentum is additive. It gains strength with each repetition because of the bounce reflex. The more you can bounce, the higher you bounce. The more you can bounce, the higher you can bounce. You get the idea. As the exercise becomes faster, the muscle works less, and the joints and spine work more because the exerciser is using momentum rather than forcing the muscle to do the work. Now, momentum is defined by two things: mass, or the size of the exerciser and the weight which they're using, and the velocity, or speed. The larger the exercises are, the more weight they lift, and the faster they move, and or the fewer restraints that are placed on their movements during the actual exercise. The greater the risks are caused using momentum, however. So, long story short, less weight equals bigger muscles when applied with the correct knowledge, because when using levers to your advantage, you can maximally load your muscles with less weight. Argument number 2. It only looks good on paper. Now, for those of us who understand intelligent training and biomechanics, we understand why they're so effective. The first thing to mention is this pesky little thing called gravity, which I've already previously mentioned. And I should point out that, once again, gravity is a very real thing, and all objects accelerate towards the ground at 9.8 meters per second squared. This is an indisputable fact, and it is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it. This is the way in which you walk, cars drive, airplanes fly, and every other thing in the known universe moves. Now, this is the same thing when you are exercising and lifting weights. When you are raising your forearm and performing a bicep curl with a dumbbell, you are producing a force with your bicep, which is acting upon your forearm, which is the lever responsible for lifting the dumbbell in your hand. This is only possible because the force you are generating with your bicep is greater than the gravitational force of the earth. However, as you well know, as soon as you let go of that dumbbell and it leaves your hand, no more force is being applied and only gravity is acting upon the dumbbell. Therefore, it falls to the ground with a nice resounding crash that so many gym bros seem to be very proud of, stroking their egos. And now hopefully we can all agree that yes, gravity does exist. It's a real thing that we all know about, except for the flat earthers. But if you're a flat earther, you're probably not even listening to this. Now we can move forward into discussing how the human body is a machine, which is composed of an intricate system of organic levers, pulleys, and hinges, which all interact with that pesky thing called gravity. I don't think I have to prove that your bones work like levers. You can actually look at that yourself. And now let's start getting into how they affect your performance and efficiency. So what was it exactly that I just said about your bones as levers? Well, a simple definition of a lever is a simple machine. And simple machines are devices with very few moving parts. Your body, my body, and everybody else's body is composed of 3 separate lever types. Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. Your arms are levers, your legs are levers. Your spine's composed of many different levers. Your teeth act as wedges. Those are levers, and they grind down your food. Now, a lever has 2 different parts, a long beam and a fulcrum and pivots. The beam is the long straight part of the lever. The fulcrum, or the pivot, is the point where the lever moves. And depending on the location of the fulcrum, again, or the pivot, in relation to the rest of the lever, or beam, will classify what sort of lever it is. A lever, or bone, that is perfectly parallel with the direction of resistance is a neutral lever. This is why we build buildings the way we do, meaning no force is required for it to stay in place. Now, a lever that is perfectly perpendicular with the direction of resistance is a fully active lever, meaning it is at its heaviest in that position in terms of effort required to hold it there, with all other factors being equal. So in this case, think about performing a biceps curl and stopping with your arm at the 90-degree position. This is the furthest that the dumbbell can be from your body, therefore, because it's at the end of your hand, which is the end of the lever. Therefore, the lever is the longest as possible, and the load is as far from the pivot point or the elbow as possible. Therefore, your muscles required considerable force to hold it there, far more than when it's in the neutral position where no load is on the bicep. And also, depending where you put the load on that lever will determine the magnification of the load as well, of course. Now your muscles cross two of these levers over the pivot or the fulcrum point and pull the two levers together. So this is a lever and a hinge and a lever, and your muscle crosses it and they pull them together. This is how you perform all movements from breathing to walking to lifting weights. So of course, once again, efficiently using your levers for maximum results is very important. So how do gravity and levers work together inside of your body during exercise? Well, any movement is produced when the muscles crossing those joints contracts or shorten, and all levers magnify resistance and force, and the universal laws of physics as they apply to levers work for the same as the levers inside of your human body or your bones. So what this means is that all resistance exercises that you perform are subject to the magnification of force, as well as a few other mechanical principles. And understanding and complying with these principles allows you to work out with optimum efficiency. Now, when a lever or bone is positioned at an angle such that the muscle can pull on it perpendicularly, it's called a mechanical advantage. This position is the most efficient angle from which a muscle can pull on a bone. Think about how your biceps looks at the fully contracted position of the bicep curl. The bicep is fully contracted, the forearm is as close to the upper arm as possible. And when his bone is positioned at an angle such that the muscle is only able to pull on it from an angle that is mostly parallel with resistance, once again, this is called mechanical disadvantage. This is the least efficient angle from which a muscle can pull on a lever or bone, and significantly more force is required to produce this limb movement. Now, for an exercise, just simply, for an exercise to be maximally beneficial or efficient, the active bone should pass through this exact resistance curve. The resistance curve is such that muscles have this strength curve, which allows them to be stronger when they are elongated or in a mechanical disadvantage, and less strong when they are contracted or shortened. Once again, just think of the bicep for an easy comparison, and just imagine that all of the muscles in your body are a whole bunch of little biceps, just all contracting and pulling your bones together to produce a variety of movements. The ideal resistance curve for an exercise should follow the strength curve of muscles. Or in other words, an exercise should provide more resistance when the muscle is elongated and less resistance when the muscle is contracted. Now, just like with anything else, when it comes to science, yes, even high school science students are not told what to believe. They are shown how to perform various experiments. And in high school, physics students use blocks and ramps and balls and pendulums and carts and rulers and timers to derive Newton's laws and many other such pillars of science for themselves. They personally do this science which has already been done by others to derive the knowledge that we already know and prove its validity to themselves, much like you yourselves could do if you weren't also lazy. It's very important to do your own learning, but it's also very important to follow science-based principles. Basically, your argument saying it just looks good on paper means nothing. And this is because science always has to be done on paper, and even science students are not told what to believe. They are shown how to perform various experiments. Even in high school, physics students use blocks and ramps and balls and pendulums and carts and rulers and timers to derive Newton's laws and many other such pillars of science for themselves. They're not told what to believe. They know. They personally do the science which has already been done by others to derive the knowledge that we already know and prove its validity to themselves, much like you all could do if you weren't so lazy, biased, dogmatic NPCs. In a nutshell, saying it only looks good on paper and is not the same in reality, really, it just goes to discredit you from having any form of adult conversation, and anyone at this point listening to you can stop listening to you. I, of course, understand why you people adopt this viewpoint, as it prevents you from needing to use your brains and actually think. It's much easier to simply swallow an ideology and accept whatever you hear if it's what you want to believe. But again, believe what you want to believe. Your beliefs are baseless. They have no factual data to them, and you are unable to defend them in any rational way. This is because you're incapable of doing anything other than repeating what you've already been told. You no longer have the ability to think critically, and you are merely assuming others are doing the same thing, regurgitating others' ideas. But they're not. There are those of us who are educated in science and actually understand physics and how things work, and we use this information to our advantage, not just our bodies, but also to help our clients and make our lives better. This is also how we build technology, such as computers and the internet, both of which you are using to claim that such science which produced them only looks good on paper and doesn't function in the real world. Argument number 3. You need to lift heavy weights. It needs to be said that it's very ignorant to assume that the heavier weight you're moving, the more you're loading and building your muscles. You can load a muscle more with significantly less weight and achieve far superior results based on the kind of physics you're using. So if you're using a longer lever, you're magnifying the weight that you're using much more. And when a muscle region has the best leverage for a movement, it contributes the most to that movement, according to the principle of neuromechanical matching. This is affected by the exercise plane of movement, the joint used, and the strength curve. Now, of course, different intersegmental interactions can also affect the relative activation of all the muscles involved in each exercise, as well as the amount of motor unit recruitment level achievable. This is because exercises that involve less muscle mass are more stable and are less complex, and all permit higher levels of motor unit recruitment to be attained, since they involve lower levels of perceived effort for the same level of central motor command. Now, working inside of the optimum resistance curve will greatly affect the mechanical tension that muscle fibers experience. Now, briefly, I'll go over the difference in perception between the weight that you are holding and the load that's actually going to the target muscles. So just imagine for a moment if I handed you a 10-pound dumbbell and told you to perform a basic biceps curl. You would have no difficulty, I imagine. However, what if I replaced that dumbbell with a 10-pound sledgehammer and I flipped it and had you hold the end of the handle opposite from the weighted hammer side? This, of course, resting a little of the handle on your forearm to remove the grip from the equation. That same 10 pounds would then be magnified by the additional 30 inches of the handle, meaning that the load to your biceps would be such that it is very unlikely you would be able to lift it with correct form, as the load to your biceps is considerably more than before. If you can use a lot of weight, all it means is you're using inefficient mechanics and you're damaging your body. It basically just means that you're lifting something up with a crowbar. The heavier the weight feels, the more efficient the mechanics are. If you could load your side deltoid with 10 or 20 pounds, and you think it'd be better to overhead press 150 pounds, you're completely missing the point I'm trying to make. The point is to overload the muscle, maximally stimulate it, not to lift a lot of plates. Argument number 4. Compound exercises are more time efficient. Now, people will mistakenly believe that doing isolation exercises take longer than doing compound exercises, assuming that they can work more muscles in a shorter period by using the compound exercises. But that would only be true if compound exercises were as productive for each participating muscle as isolation exercises. Well, how can you know? Well, ask yourself, are compound exercises better than isolation exercises? Well, do they burn more calories? Yes, but only a tiny little itty-bitty percent. Nothing really, actually. Do they save time? No, not in the slightest. You'll actually spend double or more time using compound movements. Do they produce more in strength gains? No. Muscles can't even be taken close to failure properly with compound lifts. Do they produce superior muscle size? No. Muscles can only function efficiently or inefficiently. They don't have brains. Are they safer? No. Most compound exercise movements generate extreme wear and tear and compression that is permanent. I could keep going, but you get the idea. For the purpose of musculature development, what matters the most? how much load a working muscle receives, the range of motion achieved, and the type of resistance curve produced by the exercise. For example, when you compare times, a biomechanically perfect arm day would be one set of each perfect exercise for each muscle group, then moving on to the next exercise. Then repeat in whatever tempos or sets and reps that you like. Each movement perfectly safe, maximally effective for that muscle group. Each muscle group has between 10 and 14 minutes to fully recover from the previous set, and with each set lasting between 1 to 2 minutes per muscle group, for a total work time of between 30 and 45 minutes, no matter what form of intensity you're using, with no breaks or reason to stop and be distracted, just focusing on fast-paced workouts, with much more time to recover, much more efficient gains, healthy and rapid results, no damage being done to your body or central nervous system. Now let's compare this to traditional style training or compound training, squats, deadlift, bench press. Number one, you'll be using exercises which are not efficient, take considerably longer to set up and to break down. Number two, you're going to have a gym membership or build a home gym for considerable amounts of money, which is not required when using correct biomechanical knowledge. Number three, you're going to be overtaxing your central nervous system. You're going to be slowing down your recovery time. You're going to be damaging your body. You're going to be compressing your spine. You're going to be taking a long time to set up and break down these movements, waiting for machines, etc., time, effort, and money. You guys get the idea. Long story short, using traditional style training, it's going to take many more hours a week in the gym, a lot more money, and many years longer to get to your goal. You're going to be breaking your body permanently in the process. You're going to be creating many different imbalances, which are going to hopefully have to be fixed in the future, or you might just never fix them and have a broken body forever. And at the end of the day, you're going to be considerably worse for the wear instead of being healthy and fit in a much faster way and being healthy and fit for the rest of your life. Argument 5. Muscles won't know how to work together if you train them independently. When you strengthen muscles individually, they work together just fine when called to do so. For example, if you strengthen your hip extension muscles and your quads by way of 2 separate exercises, you're still going to be able to perform a squat action just fine. Standing up from a squatting position does not require much skill. And muscles don't have brains, they only know that they have to pull on bones. The idea that a person would not be able to use both muscle groups at the same time because they didn't exercise both muscle groups at the same time is completely insane. You do it all day, every day, anytime you perform any kind of a combination movement. Did you train to chew gum and walk at the same time? A compound movement is a multi-joint, multi-muscle movement that some people refer to as functional, which is absurd because it suggests that something that isn't compound is dysfunctional. That would almost suggest that if you do isolation exercises, somehow your body isn't able to coordinate itself and move itself all at the same time. You're going to be a jellyfish in the ground independently moving levers. That's not how it works. Now understand, it's true that if you do muscle ups, you get skilled at doing muscle ups. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can cross that skill over into something that doesn't look anything like a muscle up. That's because the muscle up is not a useful exercise. It's a skill which uses multiple participating muscle groups in your body, which can also be trained independently. So again, it just means you're learning a skill. You're going to be learning to coordinate all the muscles that participate in that movement in that particular manner. But the idea that a compound movement will make you better able to use those participating muscles as compared to isolation exercises has no logic whatsoever. It's actually the opposite is true, obviously. If a person is training for a particular sport, meaning that certain multi-joint movements are extremely important in that particular sport, then it makes sense to mimic those movements from a neurological adaptation perspective. This would include the forceful inward rotation of the baseball pitch, the inclined press direction of a thrust used by a shot putter, the iron cross mechanics of a gymnast who performs on the rings. But of course, none of these requirements occur for us in normal day-to-day life, and none can be compared with standing up from a squatting position in the kitchen. In conclusion, all exercises have some degree of benefit, however minor the benefit may be. But the wisest approach is to select only the exercises that have very high value, the ones that are the most efficient, the most productive, and cause the least injury. Performing only high-value exercises allows us to reap the greatest amount of benefit with the least amount of wasted effort and the least risk of injury. Unfortunately, since none of these ignorant and close-minded so-called fitness professionals or gym bros have any idea what this means, they can't calculate anything to save their lives. They just end up looking like a closed-minded, low-intelligence moron, and they turn their video off and go back to their little bubbles. Then when I point out all these facts to them, they all get very angry, and instead of asking simple questions and revealing their ignorance, they instead cling to their ideologies and their egos. And logical fallacies galore, email me with these left and right. He said, she said, Arnold, this, that, and the other. Linking me to a whole bunch of other videos made by these idiotic con men. Well, these people are either not doing math, are poorly educated, or are lying, or maybe all three. More than likely they're trying to sell things and you guys are stupid enough to buy it from them without fact-checking them first. And these guys are counting on the fact that you're too lazy to think critically, do your own math, and come to your own conclusions, which is why you're buying their garbage and listening to their uneducated drivel. My request to you is very simple. Why don't you use your own brain, come to your own conclusions, think critically. I know it's a little bit harder, guys, but trust me, it's more rewarding in the long run. I just want you to prove them wrong. You can do it. You have the internet. You have the ability to use the internet for thinking critically, learning logic, and learning science instead of social media. You have the choice to do that. In the end, I would really just urge everybody, learn to think for yourself. Please. You will save your body considerable damage, yourself valuable time and money, and your friends, family, and clients will thank you for it as well if you share the knowledge. It is much better to train biomechanically, considering you're only going to be spending 2 to 3 hours a week in the gym and getting 100 times the results. Considering you will not be damaging your body in any way. Considering you don't even have to go to the gym if you don't want to. Considering you can do all of these exercises from the comfort of your home. You don't need anything, just the right knowledge. Now guys, if you found this video helpful, please like it. Leave a comment. If it's an educated comment, I will happily reply to it. If it's somebody replying with no knowledge who did not actually listen to this video, I'm not going to be replying to it. Just so you guys know, please subscribe to the channel as well. Follow me on social media, Coach Castle on Instagram, Castle Thompson on Facebook. Of course, my YouTube channel is here, Castle's Corner. Make sure you subscribe to that again, guys. I do live coaching Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I put up, give or take, 5 to 10 videos a week. And I do everything I can to help you guys learn how to better your body and your minds. Everything from respiratory health to biomechanical training, nutrition, the works. I have 4 different books. I have all kinds of different tools and goodies. I offer my online coaching or in personal coaching. Just check the description below. Everything is linked there, guys. I hope this was helpful. And if you know somebody who needs to see this video, please send it to them. And of course, just a final thought, I'll be cutting this very lengthy video into multiple clips for you guys. So don't worry if you didn't have time to watch the whole thing and dig back through it again. It'll be clipped up soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 yeah, go, go, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. To the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing shit my way, or the highway. And in the driveway is a nice range. Cause I grind through the climb, I invite pain. You never hear me, bitch, nah, I don't complain. Just gotta flip the switch and you can go and obtain anything you want, anything you need. Your mind's got the key ingredient, it's belief. They deceive with the negativity, but I just slide right by that energy. Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope.